At She Can, we tell women's stories. We show how women got to where they are today. And these stories are varied stories from women of all walks of life. And today I'm really honored to have Dr. Bijna K Dasani MBE with me today. Welcome, Bijna, to She Can. You are an banker turned venture capitalist and entrepreneur. You're a member of the UN Women UK, working on gender equality and the empowerment of women. You're an ambassador for the UK charity Surviving Economic Abuse, and you hold so many advisory and board roles that are too many for me to name here now. You're a thought leader and an international speaker, and you received your MBE for your services to the diversity and inclusion sector in the financial services industry. You received so many awards for your work in empowering women in business, and you're an Oxford graduate. Bijna, tell us a bit more about yourself and this incredible journey you're on.
Thank you, Stephanie. It's a pleasure to be here. I think you've covered most of it, but just to give you a little context on the journey, I started out with capital markets in the UK. I'm originally born and raised in the UK of Indian origin. I've lived and worked all over the world over the last 24 years now, I think it's been since I started out in my career. And it's been very educational as experienced from the angle of an ethnic minority female in what has been traditionally a very male dominated society from a industry perspective. So that's been very, very interesting. And that is where I got involved in some of the diversity, equity, and inclusion work that I've done over the years. And you've referred to the MBE, which was specifically for some of that work and in recognition of some of that work, but I still think we have a lot to do, right? And I think with any recognition comes the responsibility to do more and to continue to do it well. So I operate in the venture capital and venture partnership ecosystem as an entrepreneur now, because you're right, I am plugged into many different institutions and activities. And again, you know, what I've learned is that the venture capital industry has even more work to do than the broader capital markets ecosystem. And so I'm hoping to be able to help contribute small milestones, you know, to kind of help shift the narrative and create a more pleasant but equalized opportunity for people who want to benefit as employees of this sector, but also as recipients of some of the funding and the capital that's available for startups and small to medium-sized organizations, you know, looking to this sector to be able to scale, diversify, and grow.
Bijna, which is so inspiring, and you're such an important role model, and I'm so excited to have you on here because the venture capital world is a really male-dominated area where only 2% of venture capital go to female founders. Now that is really harrowing. It means 98% go to male founders. Tell us a little bit how you navigate this space as an ethnic minority female in business who has seen so many different areas and has made so much difference in the fintech, in the financial services industry. Tell us a bit more about your experiences and where were the pitfalls and how did you overcome those challenges?
So I think the first thing is recognizing that there is a gap, and you say it quite rightly. It means that we are 98% swayed one way, which means there is opportunity to grow.
Mm.
Um, you know, I think for me in banking, I learned very early on that um, there were not many other people who look like me or who were maybe from the same age demographic or the same ethnic minority demographic. So when you walk into a room, you do stand out. And also attributed to that is your thought process, your behaviors, the conditioning that you have. It's different to the collective in the room. And I think firstly recognizing that, and then recognizing that that means there has to be a translation exercise somewhere. If I'm different, I can't expect everyone in the room who's more senior or who's from a kind of a consistent background of that rest of that cohort. I can't expect them to change to cater to me. I have to flex a little bit and I have to help them become a little more understanding about what I need. And if I'm communicating something, what that translates to in their mind, right? And even if you just look at gender norms, right? The male and female brain, the left brain versus right brain, we are wired differently,
Yeah.
right? So there has to be that conscious understanding of things may get lost in translation. So the first is that translation. Second is understanding that communication is 30% or so of what you say. The other 70 is how you carry yourself, your body language, and
Mm,
a of other factors. And I think again, being conscious of that, uh, understanding that, and then communicating directly and indirectly through that is also important. So I think that became very important. And, I didn't do it all alone. I had very good role models and mentors who helped me navigate that. And I think transitioning now into the world of entrepreneurialism, I'm a first-time entrepreneur last few years, and then navigating the world of venture capital, which let's take the US, for example. I recently read that most US VC firms lack female employees, right, at senior levels. And I think, at senior level, it's only 11% that have partners that are women. So there is a lot of work to do. And wherever in the world you look at that, you can see that there is a gap. So I'm now in a situation where I'm finding myself increasingly isolated as a female.
mm,
Ethnic minority, not so much, because I'm moving sort of through geographies where there are people from Asian descent
mm,
increasingly, but the female male kind of bit still works. So I have to go right back to the beginning of my career and remember that that signaling, the translation, the communication, the direct, the indirect, all of that has to play into my messaging and my decision making. I think also what I've seen in my career is, as a woman, if you are working really hard to break through a lot of glass ceilings or stereotypical situations that exist, it can be exhausting. And I wanted to understand a few years ago why there are still so few women in the boardroom in financial services globally. And so I was writing a thesis for the University of Oxford, where I was doing my postgrad. And I focused on the gender gap in the C suite in financial services, particularly.
mm,
And to my surprise, one of the most prominent things that kind of really stood out was that women also have the queen bee syndrome. And by that, what I mean is they work so tirelessly to, navigate their way through what is day to day a challenging environment, where when they reach that boardroom and that C-suite, they feel protective, and they feel that it's been so hard to get there. They want to own that reign for a little while, and then they consciously, subconsciously don't allow for other women to come into that space.
mm,
That can also be detrimental. For me, my lenses and the most beautiful career experiences I've had and I'm still having are where the mindset is we all have a bigger slice of a bigger pie. Contribution is more important than collaboration. And I think if we take an example of, let's say, a sports team, if everyone brings their skill set to the table and knows what they're doing right, we will all succeed. So again, I'm very conscious in my daily decision making of calling this out if I see it, because quite often it's subconsciously happening. And then also educating the men in the room, or educating the majority in the room, and saying, you put yourself in the position of the individual that is the minority, and just try to be an ally. I think allyship is beautiful, and quite often, people turn around and they say, well, I never thought about that because I've never been the only one of my color or my gender in a room. Usually they're all like me. But
mm.
now that you mention it, yeah, you have a point. And of course I want to make it a healthier experience. So what can I do differently? And I think when we talk about gender, again, financial services is, yes, absolutely heavily male dominated at the top. But I have been very fortunate to have a lot of male role models and allies who have literally opened and created opportunities for me when I've not been in the room. And they have been my allies, and they still are. So I think if we can create that dialogue around allyship and just ask for that support, it's available. And then we all grow together.
Bijna, thank you so much. That was so great. You talked about an abundance mindset. You talked about allyship, which is what we need more of. You talked about the data in this industry, but that's something people can change and are changing on a daily basis. Bijna, so tell us a bit more about your entrepreneurial journey. What are you up to now?
Sure. So I do serve the boards of different companies, and a lot of those also include venture capital funds. So I have roles as advisory board member or investment committee member. So I get involved in actually deploying capital to entrepreneurial organizations. I focus on a few core sectors. One of them is fintech, and that correlates to my career in banking. One is in the technology ecosystem more broadly, zooming in on Gen AI, the future of Gen AI enablement. And then we also focus on consumer, on real estate, on infrastructure, on sports innovation. So it's quite broad. Where I work in the venture partnership vertical is supporting organizations that are looking for scale and diversification. So that could mean new market entry, could mean preparing for an IPO, it could mean a more strategic dialogue with entering into a new market where we have got government backed support. So we are working exclusively with some government agencies to bring certain industry players into new territories from a geolocation perspective to say, look, there might be a cost advantage here, there might be an opportunity advantage here, there might be a niche that's untapped in a new market where you're doing something that's quite saturated in your home market. So those are the sorts of things that we're getting involved in, and that includes supporting from a capital formation perspective also, which then circles back into the VC work that we do.
Bijna, so do you feel you are a woman on the other side deploying capital? How do you see a difference between you making decisions and potentially a man making decisions?
So I think honestly, for me, my outlook has always been that if we are making informed decisions, um, those decisions become catalyzed decisions because they are backed by data, they're backed by thorough rationale and decision making protocol. And I think there it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman as long as you're doing it in a diligent fashion. I think also what's important is looking at regulatory frameworks that support that decision making,
Mm.
looking at the strength of the industries within which you're deploying capital for these companies, and looking at the opportunities for innovation. I think there has to be going back to that piece of, if you're a team, if you're a sports team, for example, everyone brings their strengths to the table and you have a better all-rounded experience. I think the same applies for the left brain and the right brain that I talked about, the men and women. I like to ideate with the men in my team and say, look, this is my rationale for a certain type of venture. This is where I would be keen to take all of the data and make an informed decision, but these will be the milestone linked deliverables that I will expect. But I would like your view, right? And I get a slightly different view because it's coming from a different mindset. It's coming from a different way of thinking. And I think that is always helpful because by the end of those conversations, I feel like we've got a more rounded decision that's then being executed against, and also more rounded milestones that we're measuring impact against. But I think it's important to kind of take feedback and counsel from the other gender, and from people who are different. There is a lot of data out there that backs up that if you have diversity and inclusion of that diversity in your thoughts and in your decision making process as a company, you will increase your bottom line. There is no doubt about that. And I think bringing some of that into the decision making that we have, for me, is just it's second nature. It's not something that we should go out and seek. It's something that should happen. And if it doesn't happen, then we need to fix it.
Thank you so much, Bijna. This was absolutely a perfect summing up. Bijna, so what qualities do you feel you have that serve you every day?
I think I think I'm always looking to evolve and grow and learn from good people around me. I also see examples of what good doesn't look like, and I'm quick to try and take that and say I have to be mindful of that, and I have to be mindful of not falling into that trap. or replicating some of that behavior. So I think, being conscious about your choices and your actions and your words is very, very important. And I think for me, what seems to support me with what I'm doing is partly that consciousness around thoughts, actions, and words, and then it's partly being persistent. I don't think, and there are a lot of theories that say that consistency is what differentiates successful organizations and endeavors from those that may be the best in class but sometimes lose their path. And so for me, being consistent and being consistent with my teams, I think that is something that really, really supports me, and I hope that I also do contribute to and I enjoy.
Bijna, so give us some top tips for women on how they can really, find their way and persevere in finding their way.
So I will go back to the point of allyship. I have formed circles of men and women through my career that I also consider good friends and mentors now that I'm in a different space and place career wise. I think that really, really helps. That becomes your tribe effectively.
Mhm.
People that will give you a real honest view on who you are and how you operate in certain situations. And you have to have the hard truth. Sometimes it'll be something that says, well, you could have done something differently. And knowing you and knowing how you might instantly respond to something, I think you should look at it from a different lens. That brutal honesty is really important from trusted sources. Equally, when things are difficult because you are in a situation where you're trying to translate and communicate to the majority that is wired differently, I think it helps to have allyship. It helps to have people that you can ideate and sound things off with, and you all grow collectively. So I think allyship is one. The other is understanding that everyone that we meet is, I mean, I say everyone that we meet is a pool of knowledge. They're an encyclopedia, right? There is so much value that you can gain. And I don't think we need to make all of our mistakes, all of the mistakes in the world ourselves. I don't think we need to go through all of the trials to get to triumph ourselves. I think we can learn from people around us. So by actually spending time and listening attentively to people around us and understanding what they did well and what we can learn from that and what didn't work out so well from them and what we can guard ourselves from that, I think that has also been really important for me and continues to be. So allyship, listening attentively, and taking the lessons of those around us. I think those are three things that would be my top tips that I think in any situation can be applied and relied upon.
Thank you for these really inspiring tips, Bijna. So, what are you most proud of? What are your biggest achievements?
Oh, I don't think I have them yet. I have work to do. Um, but I think I have a lovely team, and I've been fortunate to work with some incredible teams through my career. So one thing I'll always say is I'm proud of my teams because without them, there would be no execution on my part, right? It's always a collective effort. So I think that's something that I have a lot of pride and joy attached to, and enjoyment and fulfillment that comes from that. I think on a very personal level, everything that I have been blessed with for me is a responsibility. Even if we go back to the MBE, it's wonderful. I'm truly appreciative. But for me, that means it's a responsibility that I need to live up to. And so I have more work to do.
Bijna, so what are your future plans? What are your goals for the next couple of years?
Through the venture capital and venture partnership work that I'm doing to enable and support a more equalized approach, at least for the companies we are working with.
Mm.
Um, a gender perspective, from a broader DEI perspective, from a funding perspective, that is where I'd like to have very conscious decision making so that, a few years from now, I'm able to perhaps publish some data on what we've done differently. And if that helps other companies, then even better.
Bijna, so who are your role models? You've been talking about them. You have many role models and mentors along your journey. Who are the ones that you remember best, or that you
I
have right now?
I think it's important to understand that role models can be anyone in our lifetimes, right? They can be people that we see dignity, patience, grace, you know, resistance, tolerance in different ways, shapes, and scenarios. And I think for me, I see some of that in family, and I have role models in my family where I see that, particularly with certain females in my family. I see a lot of drive and persistence, and I respect and admire that. And I hope to continue to learn from that. And then from a professional perspective, you know, colleagues, I think again going back to the point of learning. So I have a lot of former managers, for example,
Mm.
people who hired me into the banking ecosystem, who I have the utmost regard for. They are people that I will still pick up the phone to and lean on and say, look, I'm doing something completely different now, but I'm at this junction where I need to make a decision on something. And I would really welcome your view. I would really welcome your perspective. Or, I'm thinking about working with somebody, but I'd love for you to meet them for a coffee and just give me your feedback, because I value your decision making, and you know me, and you know whether this could make sense for me or not, given my value system. So I think there are too many to name, but they are they are many, and I reach out to them for very small tips as well as kind of more broader decision making, and I think that's what keeps it interesting and helpful for me.
Bijna, I'm so unbelievably grateful for your time, for your incredible example that you set to others, for the incredible work you've done, for the beautiful intentionality that you have behind everything you do, and for making such a difference.
Thank you, Stephanie. It's been a real pleasure, and I'm a huge fan of all the work that you're doing. So thank you for the opportunity.